Hello, everyone. Well, it looks like World War III hasn't begun yet, but I have the feeling it is not far off. Supposedly right now, Israel and the United States military planners are in consultation, trying to determine targets to hit in Iran. And so we'll see. I believe that time is very short before everything falls apart. We've had it pretty easy here in the United States and the Western world. We've had an opportunity to study the Bible, and Jehovah's made it possible. There was a time when you would be arrested or murdered for studying the Bible. And wasn't that many hundreds of years ago, the Catholic Church would kill anyone who tried to teach people what the Bible really said. But we've lived in a period where we've been allowed a time of peace and tranquility, you might say. And Jehovah's Witnesses have knocked on people's doors throughout the world, basically, and offered people a free home Bible study, an opportunity to learn the truth, to learn what God's purpose is. I took advantage of that Bible study program 50 years ago, and it established the foundation for my spirituality and for the work that I've done since then. But I don't think people are going to have much more time to have a leisurely Bible study. In fact, the prophecies show, specifically Joel, that on one day it will all just end. I read the book of Joel. But so I thought I would do like a flash course, a basic overview of what the Bible actually teaches and what the future holds. I mentioned we're on the verge of World War III, but really the world has been in a state of war for thousands of years. It goes through periods of, intensity and less intense. But ever since the devil stood up as an adversary of God, there has been war, enmity between those who serve God and those who do not. And sometimes it's been a hot, bloody war. Jesus was murdered by a seed of the devil. But how did this all begin? I decided I didn't even bring my iPad out to the studio here. It can be kind of a distraction. But I think one of the foremost things we need to keep in mind, we live in a physical world and, we're fleshly and we respond to things we see and feel and taste and all of that. But if we can keep foremost in mind that there is an invisible world, and it existed long before the physical universe came into existence. And there are creatures who live there, and they are vastly superior to humans, at least in terms of power and, I would say, intelligence. Well, Jehovah has the distinction of being the only person alive who has always been alive. Jehovah had no creator. But when he became a creator, his first creation was a spirit like himself. And this person eventually became Jesus. It wasn't called Jesus in the heavens, it's called Michael, the archangel. And Jehovah used him as, father-son kind of a thing father and son go into business together. The son learns from the father. And Jehovah gave this firstborn son the privilege to create everything else. Among the things that Jesus created were many angels. There are different kinds of angels. There's seraphs and cherubs. Well, as I say, that world, another dimension, we shouldn't have in our minds that angels are, these cute little babies floating on a cloud. No. The Catholic Church put that image in people's minds, and it's silly. It's ridiculous. We can't really imagine what a spirit looks like. The Bible describes them as a fire, an energy form. But these angels, we have something in common with them. We're made in God's image. So we can appreciate God, and we can reason, and we can have intelligence and power, and we can experience and share love and all the things that God does. And God doesn't make us do anything, does he? He gives us choices and expects us to do the right thing, to make the right choice. Well, one of these angels was given the privilege when God created the physical universe. It says that all the angels are shouting in applause. What God did, they were watching, and he made the earth and, fashioned it into a beautiful, a lovely place, and made the little Garden of Eden, and then he made a man. And then he made a woman. And he blessed them and told them to fill the earth and subdue it and have in subjection all the creatures. And believe it or not, a lot of people don't believe this, but God intended for Adam and Eve and all of their perfect offspring to live forever, and for the Garden of Eden to be spread around the world. That's what he said, subdue the earth. And Adam and Eve would still be alive. But one of these angels was given the privilege of being the overseer of Eden and to act as if he were God himself. And this angel, this covering cherub, as he was called, began to develop envy, and he wanted to be worshipped as God. He coveted something that belonged to Jehovah. And so he came up with this scheme. And he used a serpent like a ventriloquist. He didn't want to reveal himself, scare this poor girl off. But he spoke to Eve. She may have only been a few days old. We don't know. Very innocent and naive. And so the serpent says to her, "Is it really so? God said you must not eat from every tree in the garden?" And she answered, "Oh, God said we can eat of all the trees, but just not this one." And then comes the lie. Jesus said Satan was the father of the lie. And he lied when he said, "You will not die. God knows that in the very day of your eating from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and bad." Sounds good to me, right? I suspect Satan kind of maneuvered Eve into proximity of this tree, and here's this snake talking, and there's a piece of fruit with a bite out of it. Whew. I've never seen a snake talk before. He must have eaten that fruit, and his eyes are opened. She was deceived, and of course, gave some to her husband. And so mankind rebelled against God. Mankind consisting of two people, but everyone born from Adam and Eve has this defect. Well, Jehovah put them out of the garden, and other angels, as humans began to grow in numbers, other angels decided that they were going to rebel and join Satan. And angels have the power to materialize and appear as humans. Although they're not humans, they can appear as human in a body. And that's what some of them did. But they came for a very selfish reason. The 6th chapter of Genesis says that the sons of God, those are angels, they began to notice the daughters of men, that they were good looking. And it says they went taking wives for themselves, all whom they chose. That means they became men and they took women to have relations with them. And the Bible goes on to say that sons were born to them. These were the mighty ones of old, the Nephilim. But since the angels were not entirely human, their sons were not human either. These Nephilim were some kind of freakish hybrid monstrosity that terrorized mankind. And the fact that the angels took as many women as they wanted, that means that the real men, the sons of Adam, were probably deprived of having a marriage mate because these materialized angels collected these harems, apparently. So God allowed them to do that, but he didn't allow them to carry on. And he decided to destroy that world, completely, utterly destroy it. And he did so, of course, by means of a flood. And he told Noah, to build this mammoth ark with 3 decks in it. And he was going to be able to save himself and his family and the animals. Well, Jehovah brought the deluge, and it wiped out that entire world, except the angels did not drown. Their wives and their sons drowned, but they dematerialized and went back into the spirit realm. And Jehovah has put them under restraint. They cannot rematerialize, and essentially they are on death row. Because when the judgment of the great day comes, they are going to be put away. First in an abyss for 1,000 years, and then lake of fire. Well, anyway, the world has been under control and domination of Satan and these wicked spirits. But Jehovah has also, he's not abdicated his godship. He has restrained them in other ways from completely destroying us, really. They have the power to do that now. You know that. And when the Bible says that Satan, the devil, has come down to you having great anger, do you think we've really seen that? I don't. I think that is a delusion. I don't think he's come down, unless it's been in the last few months or weeks. Well, anyway, so there is this spirit world, and that's, you might say, the real world, and things that happen here on the earth are a reflection of something that's going on there, including this war. And the war is between Jehovah and Satan. It's like George W. Bush once said, you're either for us or against us, right? And that's the way it's going to be. But God hasn't really required that yet. He will. There are a couple things to keep in mind. And if you don't know the truth, one of the things that Satan said, you positively will not die, that lie is still reverberating. Virtually every religion in the world teaches that you do not die. Oh yeah, the body dies, but you have a soul that goes on. The Hindus teach that, the Muslims, the animists. And people just assume it's true. Christians believe that. Your soul goes off, you either go to heaven, you go to hell, and that's it. Well, they don't understand Jehovah's purpose. They don't realize that Jehovah created men to live on the earth. He never created humans to go to heaven. There's no way they could. Jesus explained it to Nicodemus, the Pharisee. He said, what is flesh, what is spirit. Right? Humans can't dissolve their flesh and go to heaven unless they're reborn, born again. And that would require a miracle on God's part. But anyway, Truth 101, we do not have an immortal soul. The Bible doesn't teach that. I'm not going to read any scriptures. If you're interested, it's easy to determine what the Bible says. You know, when the Watchtower was first formed, Charles Russell convened a Bible study group, and they wanted to hammer out what the basic teachings of the Bible were. Because they'd been to the churches, and they'd listened to all this and read that, and it didn't make sense. And so that's one of the first things they discovered, that we don't have a soul, that when you die, you're dead. And you stay dead until or unless God chooses to bring you back to life. And he can do that. He's almighty. You can have been dead for 2,000, 5,000 years. Every molecule of your body is gone and dissolved here and there. But Jehovah remembers. I mean, we record things on computers, don't we? We can take images and record. You can record your DNA sequence. And Jehovah remembers exactly as everyone was, their DNA and all of their experiences in life and all of their memories. And the Bible teaches that God is going to bring the dead back to life. Not in heaven, not in hell, but on this earth. That's the message of Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the good news. Isn't that good news? That all of our dead loved ones will live again? And it doesn't matter if they were good or bad. Again, I won't read a scripture, but the Apostle Paul said that he had hope toward God that there would be a resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. They will be given an opportunity during 1,000-year reign of Christ, when Satan is not here to influence us, no false religion, no warring political factions, no commercial interests taking advantage of us. People will be given an opportunity to really come to know God and love him. And it'll be a grand family reunion, and people can amend their ways, and many will. And unfortunately, some will not, and they will experience what the Bible calls the second death. And the reason it's the second death is permanent death. Like I say, everyone dies. They go to the grave, and the Bible refers to them as sleeping. That tells you right there. They're not floating around in heaven or someplace else. They're unconscious. Just like when you're asleep. And like when you're asleep, one day they will wake up. Jesus said, don't marvel at this. The day will come when all those and the memorial tombs will hear the voice of the Son of Man and come out. So that's one of the basic teachings. Also, of course, as I alluded to, Jehovah is the only true God. Jesus called him that in prayer. You, the only true God. He wasn't referring to himself. So what the religions of Christendom have taught about Jesus and Jehovah and the Holy Spirit all being one, none was before or after the other, no, that's nonsense. It's a demonic lie, because Satan doesn't want us to understand that what Jesus did and what Jehovah did for Jesus proves that Satan is a liar. Because going back to Eden, Satan said to Eve, God knows that in the very day of your eating from this fruit, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like God, knowing good and bad. Knowing good and bad means that a person can decide for themselves. They don't need God's direction. They won't need God to tell them what to do. They will know good and bad. And Satan was implying that God cannot have that. He must have all of his creatures in a state of ignorance. Because if he dares share some of his divinity with them, then they're going to, who knows what. He can't have that. So, but what Jehovah did with Jesus, because of what Adam and Eve did, bringing death upon all of their offspring, Jehovah provided a ransom. He couldn't create another human because then Satan would have a point that God lied because God said he was resting. He's still on his rest day, his great Sabbath. He's not going to create anything else. So creating a new Adam and Eve or another man, it was out of the question. So Jehovah took the life of his firstborn son and converted it from spirit to a tiny sperm and impregnated a Jewish virgin named Mary. And so he grafted a perfect creature and converted him into a human. And he can do that because we're both made in God's image, as I said. And the reason God did that is so that he could produce a perfect human that would take the place of the original man, Adam, who became imperfect. So it's a substitution. And by Jesus giving his life as a perfect man, he could buy back all of Adam's imperfect offspring. And Jesus will become the last Adam. That's what Paul called him. He'll become the new father of mankind. And he will regenerate them in the resurrection like a father. That's why he's called the eternal Father in Isaiah. Doesn't mean he's Jehovah the Father. He becomes a father by virtue of the resurrection. So that's getting back to that lie that God doesn't want anybody to be able to. So when Jesus was resurrected, he wasn't resurrected as a man. He only appeared as a man to convince his disciples he was alive because they were so dim-sighted. In fact, they said some of them still disbelieved after he was resurrected and showed himself to them. You know, Thomas said, I won't believe unless I can stick my finger in a hole in his hand. And Jesus had to walk them through his ascension because they would never have believed he had gone back to heaven. So he had to be physically levitated. And then they got it. Okay. He said he was going to heaven. I guess he knew what he was talking about. But when Jesus was resurrected as a spirit, he wasn't as he was before. Jehovah gave him life in himself. He is now immortal, indestructible. Had Jesus been immortal and indestructible before his death, he couldn't have died. You know? He could have faked it, pretended to be dead, but that wouldn't work, would it? Not only has Jesus been given immortality, but Jehovah has purposed that 144,000 others who are brought into union with Christ should also be given immortality. And that is a huge deal because of these 144,000, they're all very imperfect. Jesus was perfect, so he can understand Jehovah rewarding him for doing what he did, sacrificing himself. Because that was another issue of Satan in the book of Job. He basically argued, no man will give his life for God. He'll do everything to save his neck. And Jesus could have done that. Jesus didn't have to let them kill him. That's why when Jesus, he threw the money changers out of the temple, and they asked for a sign. By whose authority you're doing this? He says, tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will build it up. And people like the evangelicals say, how Jesus resurrected himself. No. Jesus was a perfect man. And he knew that if he gave his life, that Jehovah would have to resurrect him, because Jehovah is a God of justice. Jesus didn't have to depend upon God's mercy. God would not allow his son to remain dead if he went as far as giving his life. It would be unthinkable for God to do that. So Jesus is saying, if I'm faithful to death, I will come alive again in 3 days. And he did. But these imperfect people, that takes it to a whole nother level, because Satan has basically gotten everyone on the planet to obey him at some time or another. In Revelation, the 12th chapter refers to Satan as the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them night and day before God. And there's no reason to think that his accusations are just made up. Right? Satan is like, do you see what this fool is doing? Do you see what I got him to do? And you're going to give him immortality? You can see that would make Satan a little upset, because he knows he's facing permanent destruction. And these ridiculous little creatures made out of dirt and mud are going to rule the universe? They're going to judge angels? Yeah. So that goes back to Eden. Is God afraid to give people life in themselves, to give them immortality? They won't need to depend on God for anything, and they'll know good and bad. And they could choose to become like Satan. And God wouldn't even be able to destroy them, presumably. Paul said they're given immortality and indestructibility. Well, incorruptness as well. So they can't be corrupted, just as Jehovah cannot be corrupted, and now Christ cannot be corrupted. And why is that? Because they know Jehovah completely. And Jesus said that no one knows the Father except the Son. And no one completely knows the Son except the Father. But I think I said that in reverse. But Jesus said no one knows the Father except the Son, and to whomever he's willing to reveal him. So Jesus intends to completely reveal the Father to those whom God has called and chosen to be in union with Christ. That hasn't happened yet. But when Jesus does reveal the Father to them completely, well, to give you an idea, Revelation gives us a picture in heaven when the 144,000 are gathered, and it says they throw their thrones before God and bow before him. So, having been given it all, they will still worship the only true God. And the amazing thing is, Jesus himself, Paul explained this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that when Jesus makes everything subject to himself, then he himself will subject himself to the one who subjected all things to him. So he will turn the kingdom back over to Jehovah once he has brought everything back to the condition that Adam and Eve had in the Garden of Eden. Only at the end of the 1,000 years, it will be earth-wide and billions of perfect people on the planet. Well, I had mentioned that it's God's intention to have people living on the earth forever, and it's God's intention to bring the dead back to life and help them to qualify to live forever. But there's another aspect of God's purpose, and that is to bring Satan's world to an inglorious end and to allow people to survive the end of the world. Noah and his family survived the end of the world, didn't they? 8 people survived the end of the world, and they started a new world. We're their offspring that came out of that ark. But we're assured now that a great crowd of people that cannot be numbered will come out of the tribulation, and these will have God's protection. Because as I mentioned, the war that began in the Garden of Eden, it's gone through hot and cold phases. And before the end, it's going to be hot. It will be Christ against Satan, and you have to pick one side or the other. And those who make the wrong choice will suffer the same fate as Satan, which is everlasting death. So again, that 12th chapter of Revelation, when Christ becomes king, war breaks out in heaven. Michael and his angels battle with Satan. Down the great dragon is hurled, the one called Satan, the devil, who is misleading the entire inhabited earth. He will be hurled down, and a loud voice breaks out in heaven saying, "Be glad, you heavens, and you who reside in them. The accuser of your brothers has been thrown down. Woe for the earth and for the sea, because the devil has come down to you, knowing he has a short period of time." Well, as I said, I don't think that has happened yet, but I think it's imminent. And when Satan comes down, he is going to try to blow the world up. World War I was not nation against nation. It was not the beginning pangs of distress. It's Jehovah's purpose to allow for an operation of Satan to go to those who know the truth, to those who've been preaching about the truth, who've been preaching the good news. They have to pass a test. The Watchtower has taught them these basics, but it has also deluded them into believing that Christ began ruling in 1914 and that Satan was thrown down in, and we've been suffering all this woe all this time. And that just isn't so. We've had it pretty easy. But all that is going to change, as I say. And when it does, you won't have time to sit down and study the Bible and try to figure out what's going on. The time to do that is now, and to prepare ourselves. In fact, it says that in the book of Amos, doesn't it? Prepare to meet your God. Jesus said, who will be the one standing? Who will succeed in standing before the Son of Man? So that's my little flash Bible study from Eden to how we got here. And as I say, I've talked about this a lot, but we can expect this world that we depend on to collapse. And the governments, well, they're not there for us now half the time anyway. Look what's happening in Appalachia. You know, Americans depend on their government when there's a crisis and a disaster, and now they're saying, well, we're out of money, you're on your own, you know. But it's going to get much, much worse. The financial system is going to implode. All the millionaires and billionaires that think they're on top of the world are going to be jumping out of the skyscrapers like they did during the Great Depression, right? And there's going to be nuclear war. And Jehovah's Witnesses will say, oh, no, God would never allow that. He won't allow the earth to be destroyed because the meek are going to, well, yeah, okay. But Jesus said, unless those days were cut short, no flesh would be saved. But on account of the chosen ones, God will cut those days short. So men are going to go to the limit. Satan is going to try to destroy the world, annihilate mankind. And Jehovah is going to allow him to go to a point and then intervene. Divine intervention. They're talking about nuclear war right now. So, what better way for God to make a grand entrance into human affairs during the darkest hour of mankind's existence, faced with extinction, and Jehovah's angels start diffusing nuclear missiles, hypersonic missiles, 10,000 miles an hour. And the angel hops on it and it lands harmlessly. I think that's going to be God's grand entry. And if you don't accept Christ after that, then there's no hope for you. You're on the dark side. But again, we have to prepare our hearts to meet our Creator. And we're not as we ought to be. So we just need to work at it. Maybe I'll talk to you again next Sunday, huh?